In 1970, amid the chaos of war, a baby boy was born in Đà Nẵng, Vietnam. His Vietnamese name was Ho Quang Lam, but he would one day be known as Daniel McQuarrie. He was the son of a brief but passionate wartime romance between a young Vietnamese woman and an American soldier stationed in central Vietnam. When Daniel was only 3 days old, his mother, scared, alone, and shunned by society, left him at Thon Tom Orphanage on Yen Bai Street, not far from where the U.S. military had once built hospitals and barracks. He never saw her again. For 4 long years, Daniel grew up in the orphanage, surrounded by other Amerasian children, the sons and daughters of Vietnamese women and American soldiers who had vanished after the war. He didn't understand why he looked different, why the other children sometimes teased him for his light hair and skin. Then, in 1974, fortune finally smiled on him. An American couple visiting from Wisconsin saw the small boy with the curious eyes and fell in love instantly. They adopted him and brought him to the United States. They named him Daniel, and from that moment, his new life began. Growing up in America, Daniel often wondered about his past. His adoptive parents told him what little they knew, that he had been found abandoned as an infant in a Vietnamese orphanage. Instead of feeling angry, Daniel felt gratitude. Back then, he would later say, being a mixed child in Vietnam was dangerous. I think being left there was what saved my life. But deep inside, he always wondered who his real parents were. For decades, he had no clue where to begin. Some said his parents had died in the war. Others told him to forget. But Daniel couldn't. Then, in 2017, he met Gigi, a kind, warm-hearted woman who would change everything. They met at a party and instantly connected. 2 people who had both been through broken marriages, both searching for peace. When Gigi learned about Daniel's past, she couldn't stop thinking about it. I just had this feeling, she said, that his parents were still out there. I wanted to help him find them. At the end of 2019, she began the search. She joined online Amerasian groups, posted in Facebook communities, and even hired a private investigator to trace Daniel's records through DNA databases. For 9 months, she found nothing, only silence and dead ends. Then, one morning in August 2020, her phone rang. We found a match. Daniel's DNA had matched with a man in California, a 73-year-old veteran named Steve Rudy. At first, Steve was skeptical when Gigi emailed him. "I've never been to Vietnam," he wrote back. "You must be mistaken." But something in the message made him pause. He called Gigi and asked for more details, the dates, the orphanage, the location. After their call, he went to his desk, opened an old box, and pulled out a faded photograph of a woman standing beside a helicopter in Đà Nẵng. His hands shook. "Maybe," he whispered. "This isn't a mistake after all." The next day, he emailed Gigi again, attaching the photo. When Daniel saw it, he gasped. "That's the same uniform, the same patch, from where I was born." DNA results confirmed it. Steve Rudy was his biological father. Daniel wept. "I thought it was a dream," he said later. "I'd lived 50 years not knowing if I even had a father. And now, here he is." When Steve learned the truth, he sat quietly for a long time. 50 years, he murmured. "I had no idea." Back in 1969, he had been a young Air Force mechanic stationed at Đà Nẵng Air Base. He met a local woman at a small food stall outside the base. Her name, he recalled faintly, sounded like Lam's mother. They had spent several months together, until his unit was reassigned and he left Vietnam. never knowing she was pregnant. The realization hit him like a storm. "If I had known," he said softly, "I never would have left her. I never would have left him." The first time father and son spoke was over a video call. When the screen came to life, both of them froze. Daniel smiled nervously. "Hi, Dad." Steve laughed through tears. "I've waited my whole life to hear someone call me that." They stared at each other, two men separated by half a century, bound by blood, by history, and by love that had waited far too long. Steve reached toward the camera, whispering, "You look just like me when I was young." Daniel laughed, wiping his eyes. "And you look exactly like what I hoped my father would be." For hours, they talked about family, about life, about all the years they had lost. "We can't change the past," Steve said, "but we can make the most of what's left." A month later, Daniel and Gigi boarded a plane from Wisconsin to California. It was a trip both of them would remember forever. At the airport, Steve stood anxiously, holding a small sign that simply read, "Welcome home, son." When Daniel walked out of the gate, they didn't speak. They just walked straight into each other's arms. The crowd around them stopped to watch, an old veteran hugging a man who looked just like him, both sobbing openly, unashamed. "I love you, Dad," Daniel said through tears. "I love you too, son," Steve whispered. "I always have, even when I didn't know you existed." The next few days were a blur of laughter and stories. Steve introduced Daniel to his other children, Daniel's half-siblings, who welcomed him like they'd known him all their lives. They looked at old photos together. One, taken in Đà Nẵng in 1970, showed Steve with a group of soldiers. Behind them stood a young Vietnamese woman, smiling shyly at the camera. "That's her," Steve said, his voice trembling. "That's your mother." Daniel traced her face with his finger and whispered, "Cam on me." "Thank you, Mom." In the following months, Steve and Daniel grew inseparable. They called every day, sharing everything they had missed. Birthdays, holidays, even small things like favorite foods and songs. Gigi often watched them talk and smiled. "It's like watching two souls find their way home," she said. Steve helped Daniel reconnect with his roots, encouraging him to visit Vietnam again. "Go see where you were born," he told him. "Take me with you in spirit." Daniel did exactly that. In 2022, he returned to Đà Nẵng, visiting the orphanage where his life began. The building was old and quiet now, but when he stood in front of it, he felt something shift inside him, a peace he'd never known before. He took a small handful of soil from the ground and carried it back to America. When he gave it to his father, Steve held it like it was sacred. "This," he said softly, "is where we both began." Today, Daniel and Steve continue to share their story, not out of pride, but to inspire others. At a veterans gathering last year, Steve stood before a crowd and said, "We all lost something in Vietnam. Time, friends, maybe even parts of ourselves. But some of us were lucky enough to find something too. I went to Vietnam as a soldier. 50 years later, I became a father." Beside him, Daniel smiled. "I spent my whole life wondering who I was. Now I know. I'm my father's son, and I'm finally home."